Good afternoon, everyone. The team of Media Center Ukraine and Olga Tamanova with you. This is the 89th day of our fight and resistance for our freedom. And now, today, I would like to say some kind words to our Marines. Today is the National Day, and all these soldiers who defend Ukraine. Today we have Fedir Venislavsky with us. He is the member of the Parliament, namely the Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence. Let's talk about the work of the committee. The floor is yours. Good afternoon, esteemed journalists, all of those who are watching this briefing. Couple of words about what the Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine on National Security and Defense and Intelligence are doing. From the first day of invasion, February the 24th, all the members are staying in Kiev in their offices. We conduct our meetings very frequently on the topics that fall under the mandate of our committee. We have conducted field trips in the first couple of months. We visited all hotspots in the south, in the east, close and near to Kiev, where the heavy fighting was happening. We tried to coordinate the activities to ensure that our armed forces have everything that they need. We ensure that the armed units receive the weapons, ammunition, foodstuff, etc. We have contacts with the commands of all types and services of the armed forces. We constantly conduct meetings with the operational command of South, commands East. We conduct working meetings trying to perform the functions in the most efficient manner, but the main task, of course, is that of legislation. Our committee reviews all the bills of draft laws that fall under the auspices of the topic of defense and security, especially the latest bills which yesterday became the laws, namely on approving the presidential decree to extend the martial law by 3 months and to extend the general mobilization by the same period of time, that is 3 months. Lots of journalists ask, how come it's 3 months to extend the martial law? Well, the answer is quite straightforward. The President of Ukraine, being the Chief Commander of Staff, has the full picture and access to all of the information at all of the fronts, in all of the hotspots, in all of the regions, and he acknowledges and recognizes quite well that liberating the temporarily occupied territory, most likely we would not succeed within just 1 month. So we need to adequately assess the capabilities of the Russian Federation, even though the armed forces of Ukraine are causing substantial losses to the enemy in man and material, but still their potential is quite strong. Today, at the meeting with the parliamentary committees, the military intelligence officers informed us that Russia has been unmothballing the old armored vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, MLRSs, tries to form the reserves, sending them directly to the front lines in the east of Ukraine through Rostov region of Russia into temporarily occupied regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, to ensure that they have enough forces to launch the main offensive, which stays the same for the last 2 months. They try to encircle our joint operations force near the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. This is a strategic, well, even a tactical plan of the enemy. Another tactical plan is to encircle near Bakhmut, Solidar, our joint operations forces. Our military clearly recognizes those enemy's plans and combat them effectively. Another intense situation is in Sloboda Axis in Kharkiv region. After 2 weeks of regrouping their forces, the enemy brought reserves from Belgorod region through temporarily occupied cities of Kupiansk and Vovchansk, and now the new offensive of the Russian Federation troops has been launched against the town of Slavyansk. So they have the strategic short-term goal that they declared from the first day of the invasion, and what our military intelligence people informed a couple of months before the invasion, namely to lay the land corridor between temporarily occupied Crimea and Russia through Lugansk and Donetsk regions, through Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. And according to the military intelligence, at the territory of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, the enemy minimized the artillery strikes at our positions. Instead, they are focusing all their efforts to build defense lines, which would make it so much more difficult for us to counterattack and to liberate our territories from the enemy. That's why this should be taken into account as well. How to counteract that? Your colleagues have been asking what samples of weapons we need to receive as part of the Lend-Lease program and other military assistance from our Western partners. Well, we need long-range, bigger caliber artillery to hit the enemy sites deeper into the rear, more than 40 kilometers at least. Also MLRS that could hit the man and material of the enemy at the distance between 40 to 300 kilometers firing range. And currently our political military leaders, the president and the Ministry of Defense are negotiating with the West so that we will receive such types of weapons which would allow us to liberate the well-defended lines of defense of the enemy, and thus liberate the temporarily occupied territories. But let's get back to the extension of the martial law. Well, we will not be able to liberate our territory within 1 month, and as you know, the Parliament has introduced the martial law on February the 24th, day one of full-fledged aggression, and prolonged it twice. According to the law on martial law, according to the General Declaration on Human Rights and the Convention on Human Rights and Basic Freedoms, the country that allows to discontinue the adherence to the human rights should every time inform the UN nations through Secretary General, and Ukraine 3 times informed already that because of the unprovoked war of aggression by Russian Federation, we had to introduce the martial law, and in such legal regime there is certain restriction of international domestic human rights, the restriction on movement, the right on movement, banning meetings, protests, street marches, introducing special work regime for the military industry companies, the right to commandeer the vehicles and other assets for the needs of the armed forces. Well, these were the decisions passed by the president of Ukraine. Now it was decided that in order to extend the martial law by 3 months, hoping that that will be enough for us at the front lines, where there's heavy fighting at all of the axes, we would experience game-changing developments, and thus allowing our armed forces to start liberating the whole territory of Ukraine. That was the main argument of introducing martial law, extending martial law by such prolonged period of time. The international laws allow for this, so we did it within the legal norms that regulate such special martial law regime. The crimes of the Russians, how does Ukraine document them? Do we have some framework legal decision to handle this, to ensure that in criminal cases, cases of arbitration and, well, in terms of reimbursements, the losses and the costs, well, this is the most complicated issue, despite systematic arrests of the Russian assets at the territory of Europe and US. Well, that's only arresting the assets, while the reimbursement would allow require additional legal grounds. And for that, we need court rulings that would state that all the damage incurred by Ukraine through the military aggression of the Russian Federation, so only the court rulings on the assets of Russian Federation, both legal entities and individuals, thus we can arrest them and sell them to reimburse. This is something that the Prosecutor General's Office, the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine are working on right now and looking into the legal algorithms that will be following the norms of international agreements. And we are designing recommendations and specific actions that would allow to reimburse the damage by reverting to the arrested property and assets as part of the sanctions imposed by the West. As to the war crimes perpetrated by the Russian troops, right after it became clear that the Russian Federation waged terrorist war against Ukraine, violating all Geneva Conventions on waging the war, systemic violations of human rights of civilians and non-combatants, a number of working bodies have been established under the Prosecutor's General Office and the Ministry of Justice. They started and now they continue to systematically gather the evidence and document all of the crimes perpetrated by the servicemen of the Russian Federation. So let's differentiate here. On the one hand, holding responsible all those who were liable in perpetrating the crimes according to the criminal code of Ukraine and based on the results of the investigation of those cases, then such cases will be reviewed by the national courts in Kyiv region and the city of Kyiv, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, Kharkiv, Sumy, etc. The second component here are war crimes that are recognizable war crimes internationally, the crimes against humanity and the genocide. So as part of the international legal assistance and legal cooperation, the law enforcement agencies under the auspices of the Office of Prosecutor General are systematically documenting those crimes. From the very beginning of when we learned about atrocious crimes perpetrated by the enemy in the outskirts of Kyiv, at Chernihiv region, Kharkiv region, elsewhere, we have invited, and the invitation was accepted, to bring international experts, including law enforcement officers from the European countries who help us to systematically document the evidence of those crimes, conduct forensic expertise to identify the date of death, the time of death, and document all this as following the legal norms and procedures of international court processes. It's also worth recognizing here that the International Criminal Court, being a specialized international court, upon the decision of the prosecutor of that court in close cooperation with the Office of Prosecutor General and Ministry of Justice at the territory of Ukraine, also documents such crimes. The second court that operates in this area is the UN court that reviews the case filed by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, claiming that Ukraine perpetrated the crimes of genocide in the territory of Crimea, Luhansk and Donetsk regions, allegedly, but at the beginning of this full-fledged aggression, we provided multiple evidence claiming that it's Russia that perpetrates the genocide crimes at the territory of Ukraine. So in the Hague court meeting, the Russian Federation side did not appear, and that's why they are not following on the case that they filed themselves. So the great signal coming from our Western colleagues happened last week, namely the decision of the European Parliament to support the idea that had been initiated by Ukraine to establish the Special Criminal International Court, international tribunal that will be considering the crime of aggression, unmotivated, unprovoked aggression of the Russian Federation that started back in 2014 against Ukraine and was much extended into 2022. It's a separate crime, and in order to investigate this particular crime, and the guilty side here could be from the standpoint of potential is the high military political leadership of Russia that gave orders to launch this aggression, the military orders to invade Ukraine and perpetrate crimes, and individuals who perpetrated those crimes. So this is a very strong signal, and in the nearest future, I believe, at the international level, based on the relevant agreements, the statutory documents of this international tribunal would be approved. The President's office has all of the procedures that are being currently discussed with our international partners. Within a couple of months, we will finally have the ability to observe how this new mechanism works. The cases against collaborants, the case of Medvedchuk, extradition of Shari, could we speed up those processes? Well, speaking about Medvedchuk case, and I can not qualify it as collaboration, it's not correct, because we passed the law that sets criminal responsibility for collaboration activity. That was early March, when the full-fledged aggression started, and at that time Medvedchuk was already a person that was suspect in state treason, and incriminating collaboration would be difficult, even though he performed some of the actions that by nature are that of collaboration. As to other collaborants, each day, in respect of those people who promote and support the occupation authorities that are refusing to accept that aggression happened, claiming that Ukraine provoked the aggression. Well, this by and large is collaboration with the enemy, and such cases have been instigated daily, but it will require additional investigative efforts because it's all individual cases and we need to properly qualify them. But we have lots of such cases already, and I am convinced that each collaborant sooner or later will be held accountable here in Ukraine. What's more interesting for us right now is the last sensation that the Security Service of Ukraine published, namely the new statements from Mr. Medvedchuk, who during the interrogation claimed that the previous political leadership of Ukraine has been involved in quite serious crimes, namely in basically stealing the state property, taking one pipeline, oil pipeline that transported diesel fuel during the military aggression already, and with the help of coordinated efforts of the top military political leadership of Ukraine. So that's not only the decision of the former president, but other authorities, courts, law enforcement agencies. So lots of damage has been incurred for the country, and now Mr. Medvedchuk starts talking to us about this. Let's wait when we are able to analyze his statements to see the full picture. But what we heard already, actually, we became in awe while our soldiers were being killed at the front lines. The former political leaders were protecting their vested business interests that now could be evaluated in such a dimension that the investigators are qualifying as we speak. So this is an example. However many actions against Ukraine stay in the shadow for a while, but sooner or later they would become known and all responsible will be held to account. Colleagues, your questions? Use the mic, please. Victor Melnikov, CGTN. Is the extension of the martial law connected with the general mobilization in any shape or form, and what are the expectations from this mobilization effort? And the second question, the parliament passed the law that restricts the circulation of the drugs produced in Russia and Belarus. So can you explain the reasons for passing this law, and how would you resolve the problem of the shortage of drugs? Do we have shortage, and will we have shortage of drugs? Well, answering your first question, on the martial law and mobilization. Back on February the 24th, we introduced martial law, and as the result of full-fledged unprovoked aggression, that's when the general mobilization was announced. And general mobilization is the ordinary state of affairs when the war is on. So we need to recognize that Ukraine is at war, and all males who have the age between 18 to 65 years of age, they are subject to mobilization depending on which military profession they have, and depending on where which military professions we are lacking in the armed forces of Ukraine right now. We need to understand at war we incur losses, we need to form reserves, and we are forming the reserve brigades and the reserve units. Such reserves require personnel and men and material. So the process is on until the end of the war, expecting that the general mobilization would be cancelled. Well, we have no grounds to expect that right now, because it's very difficult to foresee and forecast the development of the events, while, like I said, the enemy has quite a strong reserve of resilience. So unfortunately, we have to face dire times when we will be fighting to liberate our territories. As to your second question about the latest decision of the parliament, where we banned the circulation of the drugs produced in Russia and Belarus, well, two components here. Economic component is this: most of the cash flow from selling the drugs, that's ultimately would go to the producers in the Russian Federation and Republic of Belarus. That's basically funding the war machine of the countries that perpetrate military aggression against Ukraine. As to the deficit of drugs, let me remind you that medicines, drugs, are one of the most substantial components of the humanitarian assistance that is being provided to Ukraine free of charge, and Ukraine does receive lots of drugs that both civilians and military require. Personally, as a member of the Defense, Security and Intelligence Committee from our partners from Asia, Canada, Australia, US, EU, we receive huge lists of drugs and medicines that they are ready to share with us free of charge, and then we contact with those services that are the providers of those medicines to the population, so there would be no deficit, no shortage whatsoever. Ukrinform, can you tell us, please, again, on general mobilization? Can you mention how many reservists have been mobilized from day one of this full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, full-scale invasion? So the extension of martial law and mobilization, will it result in the increase of the number of mobilized people? The answer was given by the president already, so I can only repeat the figures that he mentioned, because those figures are part and parcel of the state secrets. But the president outline the general idea about the figures that you're asking about, and they're quite straightforward. At the moment of the beginning of the full-scale aggression, the armed forces of Ukraine, only armed forces, were 261,000 servicemen and servicewomen. At the time of the National Resistance Law, it was 250,000. Then we increased this amount by 11,000. 10,000 of them are the territorial defense troops, and 1,000 are the special operations forces. So at the moment of the invasion, the figure was 261,000. From that time until now, we have the general strength of our armed forces at the level of 700,000. So as a result of mobilization, additionally were enrolled lots of volunteers who came to territorial recruitment centers and were enrolled in various military and paramilitary troops. Others were mobilized. So about 450,000 plus or minus people. That's the figure you were asking about. These were the people that were enrolled into the armed forces and other security and defense units from day one of the invasion. And what we're doing now, we are forming those reserve units, because we recognize that in order to liberate our territory, that means that we have to have enough capabilities and have some better numbers in terms of men and material. So in the future, I believe there will be the further increase of this figure. What would be the ceiling? I don't know right now, but let me reiterate, we are forming reserve military units so that the commanders of the armed forces of Ukraine would be able to meet tactical and strategical goals. Any further questions? Note takers, thank you for joining us live. This was Fedir Venislavsky, the Member of Parliament of Ukraine. Thank you, stay with us. Let me remind you that at 2:30 p.m. Alexander Matuzyanik, the Speaker of the Ministry of Defense, will join us in person. Stay with us.